Alright guys, welcome back to another video. Today we see how Shackleton drawn out their cruise from the harsh weather of Antarctica.
In August 1914, a crew of 28 men sailed toward the bottom of the world. Their goal, cross the entire Antarctic continent on foot, a journey of nearly 3,000 kilometers through negative 50 degrees Celsius temperatures. They carried zero modern technology, no radios and no GPS, just sledges, dogs, and raw manpower. The geography of the Weddell Sea creates a natural cage. Ocean currents push loose pack ice into this massive bay, where the surrounding landmass prevents it from escaping back into the open ocean. Over time, it compresses into a dense, permanent sheet of floating rock. By January 1915, the ocean froze solid around their wooden ship, the Endurance. They were locked in place, thousands of miles from the nearest human settlement. The explorers became prisoners of the ice, forced into a grueling 9-month waiting game as the frozen sea drifted aimlessly. Their mission of exploration ended before it truly began. They couldn't move forward or turn back, and the outside world had no way to know they were even in trouble. They were entirely severed from humanity. The ice eventually turned from a prison into a weapon. On October 24, 1915, the pressure of shifting frozen ocean shattered the ship's stir. Freezing water poured into the hold. For 3 continuous days and nights, the crew manned the pumps in negative 8-degree temperatures. They fought exhaustion, desperately trying to empty the ocean out of a dying ship. When the water level became impossible to manage, Sir Ernest Shackleton issued his first major directive. He ordered his men to stop pumping, abandon the Endurance, and move supplies to the ice. The ship was their only shelter and their only conceivability of home. Without it, they were standing on precarious sheets of ice that were constantly shifting and melting, with the freezing ocean waiting just inches below their boots. Leadership in a crisis begins with a complete pivot. Shackleton accepted the end of his mission and focused entirely on the logistics of keeping 28 men alive on a melting floor. Their environment was highly volatile. Ocean currents constantly shifted the flows, and a crack could form directly beneath a tent at any moment. At night, men slept knowing the ground could literally open up beneath them. Shackleton recognized that while the cold was a threat, despair was more dangerous. He issued a second directive, the total control of his men's psychological state through rigid discipline. He imposed strict daily routines. Every man was assigned specific chores to prevent idle minds from dwelling on their situation. To enforce a focus on survival over sentiment, he limited personal gear to just 2 pounds per man, stripping away everything but the essentials. To set the standard, Shackleton dropped his own gold coins and a Bible into the snow. He also carefully managed information, acting confident about their food supplies even when rations were critical, specifically to prevent panic from taking root. By manufacturing a sense of order and purpose, Shackleton demonstrated that a leader's primary tool isn't just managing physical resources, it's protecting the collective resolve of the team. After 497 days drifting on the ice, they finally reached Elephant Island. But it was a barren rock, completely isolated from any shipping routes. The crew was deteriorating rapidly. Men were suffering from frostbite, and one survived a heart attack shortly after landing. Rescue would never find them there. Shackleton realized that to save his crew, he had to leave the majority of them behind and attempt to find help himself. He chose to cross the Drake Passage in a 22-foot lifeboat. This is the deadliest stretch of open ocean on Earth, a place where currents from 3 oceans collide. For weeks, his small team faced hurricane-force winds and 12-meter-high waves. In an open boat, these conditions were nearly unsurvivable. Inside the boat, the men rotated through 4-hour shifts. They were constantly soaked in freezing spray and had to pump water out by hand to stay afloat. The space was so cramped they couldn't sit up to eat. They had to swallow raw meat while lying flat on the floor. By this point, their physical strength was spent. The only thing keeping the oars moving against the swell was a singular, stubborn determination to reach land. This gamble highlighted a difficult reality of leadership. Sometimes you must personally take on the most dangerous burden to shield those who can no longer fight for themselves. After 3 weeks at sea, they finally struck South Georgia Island, but the ocean forced them to land on the uninhabited side. separated from the nearest whaling station by a massive interior mountain range. Shackleton and 2 men had to cross 10,000-foot peaks on foot. Without maps or proper climbing gear, they spent 36 straight hours carving steps into ice cliffs and sliding down glaciers to reach the other side. When they finally reached the Stromness whaling station, the workers were horrified. They were looking at men who had spent nearly 2 years in the wilderness and had long been presumed dead. Shackleton immediately turned his attention to the men he left behind. Over the next several months, he made 3 separate attempts to sail back to Elephant Island, but each time the ice pack forced his ship to turn around. On his 4th attempt, he finally broke through and found all 22 men alive. They had survived 128 days on a barren rock because Shackleton's second-in-command, Frank Wild, had maintained the same psychological discipline. Every single morning, Wild ordered the men to pack their gear, telling them that the boss could arrive that very day. In 2022, the wreck of the Endurance was found at the bottom of the Weddell Sea. After 106 years in the freezing depths, it remains remarkably intact, a physical testament to the journey its crew survived. Shackleton's mission to cross the continent was a total failure, yet he achieved something far more difficult. By the time they reached home, his leadership had ensured that even after 700 days of isolation and the loss of their ship, not a single life was lost. He demonstrated that while the Antarctic could destroy a vessel, it couldn't break the psychological structure he built to sustain his crew.